Reflection, September 27th, 2020. Come to think of it, I started putting this reflection together last March when we started this journey. Back then, it seemed like this pandemic was only a blip, a short season of disruption that would be over in a few weeks. Sure, it was scary, but I remember thinking, we'll get a few good stories about people coming together, we'll stock up on our essentials, we'll ration toilet paper, and I do remember indulging my nerdy affection for new technology and camera gear. Surely we'll be back in time for Easter, I thought, for a wonderful celebration of resurrection and bliss. To be candid, I thought these kinds of things only happen to other people, to other societies separated from us by time and space, and let's face it, money. Evolutionary psychology teaches us that human beings have been more or less the same for about 100,000 years, maybe even more. Using computer terms, we are born with the same hardware as the folks who roamed the African savanna aeons ago. Take a baby born 100,000 years ago, put them in suspended animation, science fiction style, reanimate them in the 21st century, and that kid will learn our languages and soon enough will be making TikTok videos themselves. Therefore, our forebears, our Israelite forebears, are us. That's why we can relate to them. As awful as their lives were in Egypt, and they were awful, let's take their word at it, their lives were disrupted, and they were thrown into a new and frightening situation. They were cast out of their routines, such as they were, and flung into the newness of the desert, carried by their own excited inertia, and that could only take them so far. I can imagine some of them thinking, we'll get a few good stories out of this about people coming together, we'll stock up on the essentials, and we'll reach the promised land that Mo keeps talking about in a couple of weeks. I wonder how the news that it would be a lot longer than that filtered through the group. I wonder if it dawned on them at the individual and corporate levels slowly at first. Some disbelieving, others panicking, some attempting to soothe, and then the malaise of a long, life-changing, and for many of them, life-ending endeavor sets in, foisted upon them by none other than God, God's self, or at least as they understood God and providence and the like. At any rate, it became time for them to come to grips with the emerging fact that things would never be normal again. Just yesterday, it was reported that the cases of COVID in Ottawa are about as high as they ever were. There are 38 outbreaks at Ottawa schools. Dr. Etches has invoked some pretty stiff fines for folks who do not comply with health regulations that were unimaginable just 6 months ago. Is it time for us to come to grips with the emerging fact that things will never be normal again? Not for church, not for schools, not for society at large. Will things get better? Yes. Will things get 2019 again? No. Well, crap. I don't know about you, but I'm settling into my complaining stage, and I'm in good company because so were the Israelites when they reached the sickly sweet point of their own season of grumbling and quarreling with God and his agents Moses and Aaron. It must have felt good at some level to bicker with Moses and with God. It must have scratched an itch. I mean, if we're being honest, who doesn't, at least at some level, enjoy a good gripe session? We do it because there's an emotional payoff, a temporary one, but a payoff nonetheless. So here I go. Where the hell are you, God? Just when things were starting to get better. Boom! Second wave, or at least that's what it feels like today. Today, Wednesday, September 23rd. I mean, we wore our masks. We made the painful and correct decisions, like separating our kids from their grandparents. We lined up for grocery stores. My kids didn't get to see their mother for 5 weeks as they hunkered down with me because that's what we were told to do. I mean, do you know how much it costs to feed teenagers? Well, of course you do. Heck, we even had to make do with one-ply toilet paper from the dollar store. The dollar store. One ply. But all kidding aside, people got sick. Some died. Right here in Orleans. And now, 6 months later, it feels like it's just here. Still. I'm sick of not being with my beloved on Sunday mornings. I want to plan Advent, Christmas. I want the bazaar to happen. I'm thirsty. We're thirsty. Now, some of you might be getting ahead of me right now. I wonder, that is if you've managed to stick through this sermonette so far. If you're anticipating this minister swinging around to the hope part, pointing at the water coming from the rock and making some connection to the great stuff that's happening, despite the fear, despite the overall lousiness of this lifeless desert situation that we find ourselves in. Well, I'm not going to do that. Not really. I'm leaving it with you. I'm leaving it with God. Now, I did do some research into some cool illustrations, like the idea of terraforming lifeless planets like Mars into places of abundance, flowing with milk and honey, as it were. I even wondered how I could work in the Genesis device from Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan and the Search for Spock. And I will. I'll do that. I'll do that on my own time, though, for just me, maybe with my family around the dinner table. What's more, I was going to take my whole camera rig out to Princess Louise Falls. I love it there, to record this reflection from there, but I didn't feel like it. Despite my sour mood, I do have a spiritual toolbox with me, though. In it are stories like this, signs of goodness that make my heart sing, practices like long walks at sunrise, being with the people I love, being with my dog, Pixie. And that'll work. Most things always do. They bring me around to finding and appreciating and, of course, preaching about God's gospel love in action and in fact. But I'm leaving metaphors of hope to you today. If you're blessed enough to have hope with you, leaving them with you and God. What's in your toolbox? What's worked for you in the past when you've been flung into deserts of your own making or deserts of circumstance? What's your rock and where's your water? Now, if I were in church preaching this, I would have this conversation live with my folks at Rothwell in real time. That's how we operate. There's always kind of a back and forth. But darn it, this medium of YouTube does not lend itself easily to that. But Zoom does. A few of us gather every Sunday morning for a Zoom coffee time following worship. Why don't some of you join us this week? I'll ask the Daves to post the link in the video description. You can just follow that. I'll put the meeting ID and the password and all that stuff if you need it. We'll start around 11:20-ish this morning, right after this worship service. And we'll go until about 11:50 when we start to get hungry for lunch. So join us for a gripe session. And if you like, I hope you do, share some of your own stories of rocks and water, because we all need our stories of hope. Amen. I guess.